Conversations with Nicole. Let's talk about it. Tell me all about it. I'm here. I want to know what's on your mind. Ooh, the world needs to hear from you, and I'm so glad to have a conversation to reach the nation. And it's all about you. We'll help each other to discover innovative ways to positively change the world. Let's talk about, let's talk about, yeah. Let's talk about conversations with Nicole.
Greetings. Welcome to Conversations with Nicole. I am Nicole Everett, your host. And Conversations with Nicole is a talk show based in Tallahassee, Florida, focused on connecting the community through conversations. And today is what I call Wellness Wednesday. Wellness Wednesday is an opportunity for you and me and my guests to talk about whatever it is we want to talk about. But tonight we are focusing on understanding psychological evaluations. We have been seeking to normalize a conversation around counseling and therapy in Black and Brown communities. So I am super excited to have my guests here with me tonight. This is an interactive live, so I expect to hear from you. Your comments, your questions, bring them on. So jump on here, tag a friend, let them know they need to be on here to talk with us about psychological evaluations. So as I normally do before I bring my guests on, I want to hear from you. I see some of you already commenting, which is wonderful. But tell me, what city and state are you tuning in from? What city and state are you tuning in from? Put that in the comments and we will give you a shout out. So I see Miss Thelma Seals. Good evening. Thanks for being here. Yeah, Miss Paula Lewis. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Paula is a doctor of psychology right here in Florida. So grateful, and actually a childhood friend as well from Miami, just like me. So glad that folks are tuning in, chiming in. Again, we are seeking to normalize the conversation around mental health and wellness. And particularly in Black and Brown communities. And Thelma, yes, is in Tallahassee, Florida. So again, appreciate you being on the live. But again, tell folks they need to chime in, they need to tune in. We are live on Facebook, on YouTube, and on the Greater Works Network on Roku TV. So you can watch right from the comforts of your living room on your TV if you have a Roku TV player or stick. All right, so I want to, Paula put in she's in Melbourne. My singles mingle buddy, Nick Rains, who's also a clinician, is here in Tallahassee. He's tuning in, as well as Miss Dora Strong, who's here in Tallahassee, as well as Miss Tracy Golay. So shout out to all of you. Tallahassee is definitely representing tonight, and we love it. We love it. So my guest, Laronta Rush, Dr. Laronta Rush, is actually a Florida girl, but she is based in Atlanta. So Dr. Rush is founder and director of Healthy Mind Psychology Associates and the Center for Executive Functioning, with two offices, two locations, one in Tucker and one in Dunwoody. So for all of the ATLians, she's right there in the Atlanta metro area. And her practice specializes in psychological testing for a range of mental health conditions such as learning disabilities, child and adult ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, anxiety, as well as bipolar and other mood disorders. The practice has about 8 therapists that provide psychotherapy for treatment of these conditions. Dr. Rush has particular clinical expertise in evaluation and diagnosis of dyslexia and other learning disabilities and ADHD executive functioning difficulties. Now, I'll tell you, when I spoke with Dr. Rush about executive functioning, that was something I was not familiar with, but she has started a whole center for executive functioning at Healthy Minds. And this division of that practice focuses on helping children and adults show up more effectively in their day to day lives by offering videos, webinars, and executive function coaching for issues interfering with their ability to accomplish tasks and reach goals such as poor time management, procrastination, um, organizational difficulties, and lack of follow through. Dr. Rush completed her education at the Florida State University in Knowles in the House and earned a PhD from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. She has nearly 20 years of experience in the field of mental health, and I want to introduce her to you right now. Welcome, Dr. Laronta Rush.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome.
So happy to be here.
So glad to have you. So glad to have you. So I see there are some folks that are chiming in. Ronald Rush,
Oh,
is that the hubby?
that's the hubby.
Okay, thank you, hubby. Yes, we appreciate you. Appreciate you tuning in. All right. So we got the chief here in Tallahassee, and Thelma has tagged a whole bunch of people. And Dr. Paula said, Dr. Rush, woohoo.
That's my friend.
Yes, yes, yes. And that's how we connected, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So Paula is the reason you well, look, you're
Mhm.
here. Sometimes there's a disconnect from me because I talk to so many people and I have so many clinicians on here. But yes, thank you, Paula, for connecting me with Dr. Rush. I appreciate that. So tell the people, because I just talked about what you do, but who is Laronta? Tell them, who is Laronta Rush? Not what you do, but who are you?
Oh my gosh, I do not think I don't think I've ever been asked that question. But good question. Who am I apart from what I do? I think is a whole nother podcast episode, right? Um, but I am a mother, love being a mother. Was one of those that had really focused on career and education a lot. So I had a child a lot later in life. So I'm so grateful for that. A lot of sacrifice that sometimes we make in holding off and starting a family. So I am certainly a mother, a wife, and a friend, a daughter. I love playing tennis and painting when I can, and just enjoying life,
Nice.
watching TV.
Okay, nice, nice, nice. Well, it's good to know all of these other things about you
Hmm.
because I think that's important. You know, we get so caught up in our identities in terms of what we do, but there's
Yes.
more to us than just that, right?
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Absolutely.
very good. So, tell us a little bit about the practice. I mean, I know I shared some about it, but in terms of like, well, first of all, what prompted you to get involved in psychology?
I was in undergrad
Mhm.
and I was always planning to be a dentist. And I had enough credits and classes just before graduation in chemistry and biology to be a dentist. And then I took one psychology course and just became obsessed. I was just very into just how the brain worked, very into the social studies that um, where people sort of have like this group effect of everyone is doing something and just what motivates people and their behaviors.
Mhm.
I just became very, very interested in that. And so I decided to go into psychology and at Florida State did my master's and specialist level work there and just kept going and went to the University of Tennessee. And it's been great.
All right.
I love it. I love helping people. I love helping people um, discover and put a name to what's been ailing them
Mm-hmm.
all this time. And it's not just them. There is actually something that explains what you're going through
Mm-hmm.
and research that tells us how we can best help you.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, what's the best part about what you do?
I would say working with the people that I work with. I mean, I love like my families and parents and just especially people who are so grateful to have answers. And because we all know, like, you have kids and you don't want to see them suffer, and for whatever reason, they may be struggling in one or more areas. And the same thing with adults. I think that since COVID-19, I've had a lot of adults show up in the office trying to figure out why they can't manage. All of a sudden, they have to work from home and they're less productive. They are really, really struggling. And even people who lost jobs and loved ones due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there's just been an increased sort of amount of um, need for mental health services, and people, I feel, less reluctant to seek out and to seek those services.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good. All right. Well, let's dive in. But before we do, I have a short disclaimer that I read because we don't want people to confuse this session as a counseling session.
Right.
Although you may receive some self care by way of some of the things that we talk about. This does not substitute in any way you going to therapy. So all topics, past, present, and future, on Conversations with Nicole are for informational purposes only. They are not to be used as a diagnosis for treatment or an answer to any personal issues related to the topic being discussed before, during, or after the program. All right, so there I said it. Okay, so I'm really interested in this topic tonight because this to me gets to like the root of your being treated for whatever it is that's ailing you, and that is the psychological evaluation. So knowing what it is what your condition is. All right, so let's start off with like, what is a psychological evaluation?
So, a psychological evaluation is used to determine if there is a diagnosis that is relevant and that explains symptoms that you might be going through. And the way that we do this, the way that we get at those answers by a psychological evaluation, is a number of methods of information gathering, basically. So some information might include talking to your loved ones, for example. In the case of a child, we definitely talk to parents. We get information from teachers. In the case of adults, we sometimes talk to family members and spouses just to get an idea of the functioning, particularly if someone is not a good reporter themselves. But there's also interviewing of the person. So there's a lot of background history, clinical history information that we're using to how long has a problem been going on. So we want a lot of information about, how long this has been occurring, how significant it is in terms of interfering in your life, because we can all be somewhat anxious at times. I mean, everyone is anxious and everyone is sad. But what makes it problematic is when it's occurring for too long, or it's severe, or it's interfering with your ability to get up and to go to work and interfering with your life in a really significant way. And so that kind of information through interview is very important. But we also gather information through a series of tests. And there's IQ testing that gives us an idea of what's your general level of sort of like functioning, your ability to learn and to problem solve, to think in abstract ways. And are there limitations there that we would expect your functioning to not be as strong if there are limitations? And so we also look at, based on the problem that we are assessing, if it's learning, of course, we're going to look at a bunch of academic testing like reading, writing, and math. But if it's attention deficit disorders like ADHD, we will have you complete rating scales and also have you do a number of different tests in the office that sort of measure your ability to sustain attention, while you're working on a task, or divide attention between two different kinds of things. And so it's through those types of things that we look at all this information, put it all together, and determine if your symptoms sort of line up in a way and at a significant enough of a severity level that warrants a diagnosis of some kind.
Wow, you have said a lot. I was trying to take notes, but that was a whole lot. Again, just becoming aware of all of the things that are considered. One of the things that you mentioned was an inability to function. So, doing your daily task, right? Because of this condition that you are
Hmm.
experiencing, right?
Yeah.
So, you said through interviewing, these things are kind of flushed out. How long is this process? Is this like a kind of one and done, or is this over several sessions, or how in terms of the assessment, or doing the evaluation? How long of a process is this approximately?
Good question. And that could vary. Usually, the interview is or the initial interview is about an hour, sometimes a little bit longer,
Mhm,
just to get all of the information, the background information. And then there's the actual testing appointment, which can be anywhere from 4 hours to up to 8 hours,
mhm,
if it's a longer evaluation. And in that process, we're still asking questions and getting information. And then there's a report written and a feedback session where we go over the results. And I'll back up and say the reason that the history is so important because in African American communities, sometimes getting an evaluation is sort of, and getting a diagnosis is stigmatized. And so there are times where there are disorders diagnosed in the family. Family history is very important. Having one or more sort of psychological diagnosis puts you at risk, especially in the immediate family, of having, a psychological problem at some point yourself, puts you at higher risk. Not that you're absolutely, but the predisposition is there. So
mm,
knowing about your family history is very important, but there are a lot of times where there are no diagnoses because they didn't seek out the evaluation to get the diagnoses. And so in those cases, I often will ask about family members who have, so maybe there's no diagnosis, but has anyone ever struggled with like having like mood problems or had any sort of instability in like housing or on jobs? And when we think about impairment, like what does that mean in day-to-day life if someone is impaired?
mhm,
You're anxious or you're sad and depressed. Usually you can get up and, push through and, get through work the next day. It's those that are more truly impaired that it really, you know, they really struggle to get out of bed. Maybe they've lost jobs because of ADHD and they can't get things done, can't get to work on time. Those are the things that I mean by really impaired. And so even undiagnosed, we often know someone in our family who, they've struggled with those kinds of challenges or thoughts of self-harm or that cousin that talks to himself all the time,
mhm.
those kinds of things. Even if undiagnosed, we definitely want to get at that kind of information through interviewing also.
Wow. So again, you said a lot, and so when you mention family history, is that something that you get in that initial interview?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
All
So
right.
those are the kinds of things that we're trying to, is this something that is, regular anxiety that everyone gets anxious, from time to time? Or is this something that's more severe that without treatment, may be even more harmful?
Okay. And you spoke specifically about African Americans, which one of the questions that was in the back of my mind was around the testing and whether or not there was some cultural consideration with the test. You know, being Black in America is not an easy task,
Hmm.
and there is something called racial trauma, right? And so the impact on that could definitely have an effect on somebody's psyche, right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
So, is there any consideration given to that with the testing instrument, or you know, I don't know.
And that's such a good question. In terms of that is a really good question. And the way that I see this possibly impacting is the way that I account for it is in the interpretation. So if I have a 8-year-old boy that the teacher thinks needs to be evaluated, but this is a 8-year-old boy in a class full of non-black individuals, and he's considered hyperactive and impulsive. Is that just you know the expectation, that he should just sit still and you know be quiet for 8 hours a day rather than the teacher trying to use behavioral methods? And so a lot of times our kids can look or be perceived as more overly active or defiant and oppositional, when really the behavior is just normal or typical for a kid that age. It's just perceived as more severe. So that's something I'm always cognizant of. I'm always getting information from teachers. I always want to know specific examples, of behavior. And also, is this interfering? If the kid is still able to get, all A's, maybe we should just provide him with some breaks rather than requiring him to sit for longer and longer periods. And so there's definitely that. The other thing I will say, and without getting too in the weeds about things, but it's all about like what's underlying the problem. So if someone comes in for depression or trauma, but it's related to bullying, from 3 years ago, or a rape or a sexual assault, but they're just as likely to come in for racial trauma. So not everyone's trauma is the same. So it's really about what's underlying the symptoms. When did they start? What's maintaining it? What's driving it? And getting at that core of the problem that may be manifesting itself in anxiety or depression. But what's that core issue? And then addressing that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad that you stated that it is based on the evaluation, and it sounds like you take some additional care to give some consideration to some of the experiences that may be happening. So it sounds like you have to be really kind of highly sensitive to a number of things in terms of making these evaluations.
Absolutely. And I will say that I think my therapist, and I'm not doing a lot of therapy, but I think where that racial trauma and that comes up a lot in therapy, like this individual one-on-one sessions that you're having with your therapist, building relationships. I definitely think that comes up a lot more than it does in like a shorter evaluation to diagnose a disorder, unless that is actually the core or a part of the reason that you're struggling to function.
Okay. Interesting. Very good. So let me ask you, well, let me pause here for a moment. I'm going to get our audience involved. So if you all don't mind, this is a safe space. If you would, by wave your hand, thumbs up, church finger, how many of you have either had a psych evaluation yourself or know someone who has? Okay. If you've had one, or someone who's had one, just give me a thumbs up or a hand wave or something, because I'm really kind of curious as to, again, we are kind of uncovering this today. I mean, I know this is your daily work, but I've not had these types of conversations with any of the clinicians regarding what goes into an evaluation. Like, I've looked at the book. Is it called the DNC? What's the name of the book where all the diagnoses are
The
listed?
DSM?
Yes. So I've looked through the DSM, which is very vast. In fact, found some things in there that I didn't even know, were diagnosable.
As people are answering, let me say this. If you have a kid in school that is in special education or has an IEP, likely they've had a psychological evaluation done by the school psychologist. So what I'm talking about is the same thing that millions of kids have had already, because the public school does offer these evaluations for free before they write an IEP for a kid that needs special education services for some reason.
Okay. All right. So should you have an evaluation done by the school, or should you have someone do it privately?
Um, privately, but
that
that,
was a good lead-in question, right?
yeah, I could say, yeah, but yeah, I think personally it's better to have one done privately. I don't only because I mean, and I worked as a school psychologist, and so I certainly, and Paula, awesome psychologist, school psychologist, and all the awesome school psychologists out there. But we certainly work with a lot of people who were just overworked, busy, and there wasn't a lot of thought and care put into it. But if you're really going to uncover something meaningful, you really need it to be meaningful, and you need it to be, thorough and comprehensive. And I think that's probably guaranteed to be done in a private, setting. Whereas in the school setting, there's just a lot of limitations. And also it takes a long time to get through the process of even getting to that point.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, thanks for sharing it. So what would, once you get the evaluation, then what would you use it for?
Good question. And so let's say an evaluation, and this is for a child and an adult that's struggling with attention. There are times I've completed an evaluation and it's not ADHD. They just need, a place to do homework where brother and sister aren't, running and throwing things around, and they need a quiet space. It's not really an attention deficit disorder. And so, but if it is, and the concerns are consistent with the diagnostic criteria, then we might use that diagnosis to get medication. Medication is one of the primary research-based treatments for attention deficit disorders. And also executive function coaching. It really helps the coach to understand sort of where the deficits are. If you are failing because you cannot remember to turn things in, there's a process for that. There's some things that we know that work for that, and how you set up your environment to be more effective and getting things actually completed in a reasonable amount of time and getting them back to school. If you're an adult who can't get to work on time and you've been told you're late one more time, you're fired. There are things that we can do to sort of help, to get you on the path to addressing some of those issues that are impacting your functioning.
Okay, good deal. So, and is there a difference in the testing adults versus children, or is it basically the same type of interview questions and testing that's done?
Mm-hmm. I say it's basically the same. It's about the same with adults. I mean, there's just different versions of the test just based on the age. But it's about the same. If you are a young child, you're less able to provide sort of self-report clinical interview. You don't really have reasoning skills at that time. Sometimes we try to get information through drawings, but you're not able to provide as much self-report information to understand sort of like if you're aggressive or you're acting out. We don't necessarily know from the child's mouth, but we can, sort of do an assessment to look at the behavior when it's occurring to try to figure out why it's occurring. But yeah, I would say that's the biggest difference with age. Adults are more capable of explaining their history and, the reasons behind some of their dysfunction.
So what conditions are kind of showing up more prevalently with both adults and with youth, if you can share that?
I would say definitely autism and ADHD. Autism being a developmental disorder that really affects and adults as well. I've actually had a spike in just assessing adults thinking that they have autism, and oftentimes they actually do. That's just long-standing, the hallmarks of autism, long-standing difficulties in social relationships, developing social relationships, being able to interact comfortably with other people, engaging in back and forth conversation, making eye contact. There's a lot of sensory problems that they experience with difficulty with tags and textures and Also, a lot of anxiety with autism, and repetitive. The other hallmark symptom is like repetitive behaviors or interests. So they're really stuck on a certain topic, can't get off of a certain topic, or part ways with a certain object without significant, distress or meltdown. Just have a very, very strong need for sameness and things to happen the same way. So that's autism, and that has I definitely see that a lot. And it's something that I also, when I get a lot of referrals for that, it's usually the pediatrician that the parent is sharing these things with. They're sharing the symptoms with the pediatrician.
Mhm.
So I am working on this checklist to give to pediatricians that's kind of like a dry erase, symptom checklist, because I always see that the parent will bring up a symptom and then they'll start looking on the internet and they'll print some things out. And so when they see me, I see these printouts by the pediatrician. Maybe it's this. And so I want to have this dry erase, I don't know, like a chart, so that they can see what are the core symptoms and ask the parent in the moment, and then refer if it sounds like those are things that the kid is experiencing.
Gotcha. Now, where do you receive, most of your referrals from, or your clients from?
So that's changed over the years.
Okay.
Now more so it's private schools, and
Mhm.
I work a lot with private schools and kids needing accommodations,
Mhm.
and also with pediatricians. And there is this psychiatry center here in the area that refers a lot of adults. And
Mm.
so we work with a lot of adults, and these are adults who are wanting to be assessed for issues ranging from trauma,
Mm.
to ADHD, to mood disorders. And it's a practice of psychiatrists. And so they sometimes require a more definitive diagnosis to help with diagnosing, to help with medication management,
Okay.
because you give someone that has, you know, a mood disorder, an ADHD medication, or, there's some medications that you don't want to prescribe if a client, has a certain diagnosis. It could just be really bad. So
Gotcha.
they like to have a definitive diagnosis.
Okay. So we got a couple of comments and questions up. Pamela Jones Smith, who's here in Tally, she said, I have a niece that is 12 now, and she's been on medication since 5 or 6. She has a pill to go to bed and get up. And over the years, she has changed drastically, so much that it is very concerning to me. I explained this to my sister, but it hasn't gone anywhere. And so, not that
Mhm.
again, this is not counseling or what have you, but what could possibly be, going on in that type of scenario?
Yeah, and without knowing the reason for the medication,
Mm.
and without knowing the diagnosis associated with that, I will say that I've heard some variation of this a
Mhm.
lot,
Mhm.
especially with respect to ADHD medication. I find that parents are less hesitant, for, um, you know, medication for anxiety and depression. It's mostly acting out in class and hitting others, she says. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so there's no medication for acting out and hitting others unless it's tied to maybe some of the impulsivity, and some of the unintentional sort of like aggression that kind of comes with ADHD. And sometimes kids with like mood issues
Mhm.
are prescribed medication to sort of help calm their mood. But there's a lot of advances in medication these days. And so I definitely, there were a lot of parents who are rightly worried and concerned about giving their kids medication. And I would be too.
Mhm.
But there's just so many advances in what we know about medication and how helpful it can be, that if there's a medication that's making a kid a zombie, well, there's other medications that they're not stimulants, that they have a wide range of dosages that you could try. And I think in some cases with some disorders, particularly mood disorders, it's unsafe and unhealthy to not be on medication. And
Mhm.
so it's definitely recommended that if it's a disorder or something that you're diagnosed with that requires medication management, to work with your prescribing doctor to try to find the right dose, the right medication by giving feedback, taking notes on your symptoms when they're worse. If it's making you feel sick or disrupting your sleep in any sort of way, and taking those kind of notes and giving those notes to your doctor is the quickest way to find a regimen that really makes sense and that works.
Mhm. All right. Thanks for sharing that. So Pam's follow-up question is, would you recommend that she get reevaluated?
I would say if a person has been, first of all, if the diagnosis didn't come from an evaluation, yes, there are a lot of times where a kid will be acting out and go into a psychiatrist's office, and that psychiatrist will talk to them for 20 minutes and give them some medication. And if that is the case, yes, be evaluated, have a more comprehensive psychological evaluation that's based on more than a 20-minute interview
Mhm.
to make sure that that's what the kid should be on. Secondly, if the kid did have that type of comprehensive, lengthy evaluation, but it's been a couple years and they are not improving, the symptoms have worsened or the symptoms are different now. So, whereas they were a little inattentive, now they're more aggressive and maybe they're having mood issues. So, anytime there's a change in symptoms or the symptoms are worsening, or more impairing, I definitely would recommend a reevaluation, or and more importantly, to go to the questioner. If the treatment isn't working, if medication is not working to treat the symptoms, then maybe there's another comorbid sort of disorder that's the reason explaining why as much progress is not being made, and we need to know what that is.
Okay. Very good. Thanks for sharing that. Solomon had a question. He said, I believe you mentioned earlier that family or genetics playing a factor to an individual's mental health. How does region or community play into a person's psyche? I travel a lot and I tend to see different people from different regions that think alike, act alike, talk alike, etc. And these are people of all ethnicities. What is that? So, is there something from an environmental standpoint in terms of location that plays a factor into mental health?
I would say, and even just with like times recently, and just with the racial tension, like I don't ever remember it being this way.
Hmm.
And it's every day on the news, or you're seeing something that's an injustice, or that heightens everyone's sort of sense to this injustice that's happening. And I think that regionally, there are some places that might be a little bit more progressive, whereas you may not have as much of this. But if you're certainly living in places where you have a governor or school boards that are, trying to roll back your rights, and this, or places that are heavily policed in some ways. And so I definitely think in terms of that sort of the racial injustice, and that's an example of how where you live and the makeup of your community definitely can cause a lot of problems in your psyche. Again, that racial trauma, whereas you might not see that as much, even regardless of the race. And I think what really aligns us is not only race but socioeconomic status. I mean, there are some people who are um, doing quite well, and they make a lot of money, and regardless of your race, you may not experience some of the issues that someone might experience who, they're in poverty, or they just lost their job, or they can't really feed their families. So are you in an area or geographic location where unemployment is high? So I think absolutely, not only sort of geographic areas, but the current sort of like circumstances of the world all of those things can certainly impact someone's psychological well-being.
Yes, good question, Solomon.
Yeah.
I think that maybe we don't look at it so much on a micro level, but it does play a role in the impact and the things that you said, Dr. Rush, in terms of if your area is heavily policed, or if some of the local politicians or officials have certain mandates that they're putting in place, that uh, that affect maybe some of your liberties, then that could present a problem. So
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
hmm okay, so Princess is on and she talks about the best choice she made, and her children are able to be more focused and self-control due to awareness and therapy. So I think Princess had her children psychologically evaluated. Had to change my household to better understand the needs of my children, being that I have two with ADHD and impulsive disorder. So
Mm.
I'm kind of curious in terms of, you talked about maybe a shift in behavior as time progresses. Is that a common thing? And I don't know. I guess it depends on the treatment,
Mm-hmm.
but do you see maybe conditions getting better in as a result of the prescriptions, or some other treatment, and that's actually really part of another question that I have: are there any other treatments that are recommended outside of medicine management, pain meds, or not pain meds, but pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, therapy, 100% therapy.
Hmm.
And, even more so, I mean, because medication will help only so much. I mean, you still wake up and go to sleep thinking the way that you think. And if you don't do some work and sort of changing your cognitions around who you are, where you are, how likely you are to get out of where you are, then you might remain stuck. And so I think that therapy, in addition to medication, um, is going to be the best combination of treatment. And the vast majority of people I see after a psychological evaluation, um, you the vast majority of people I see do better, because here you have a diagnosis, but then there's also a roadmap. A psychological evaluation comes with a lot of recommendations. And so, based on your IQ test, for example, if it shows that your working memory is poor, then that might explain why you can't remember things, from day to day, or why you're struggling to remember something once you finish reading it. And then there's recommendations at the back of the report that tells you how to address that. And so when you're able to do those things, to identify based on how your brain takes in and uses information, these are my weaknesses and these are my areas of strength. So if I'm a better auditory learner, every time I took a test with Dr. Rush, and it was looking at auditory learning or auditory memory and recall, I excelled. But anything with visual memory or visual understanding visual patterns, my score was way lower. Then I may need to talk out loud, or I may need to verbalize things to help myself understand and recall them. I may not be the best flashcard learner, or person that's going to learn by, just reading something. And so that's kind of how the assessment sort of links to the interventions. And once you're able to do that, you're able to improve a lot of the conditions and individual symptoms that initially caused you to show up in the office in the first place.
Okay. Wow. Again, yes, quite interesting. So I'm kind of curious, and I know you have the executive functioning piece, and while I think that's a whole nother live in and of itself, you kind of touched on that just a little bit. But if you could kind of talk around, maybe some techniques that are used with the executive functioning to help people do better in those areas of, time management, or, any of the other issues that come up as
Mhm.
it relates to that.
So many. Yeah, there's just so many. I guess one example would be the overall concept is to make time visible.
Mm,
Okay. Um, if time is not visible, particularly if you are someone with ADHD, which almost always is, it's a given that you have these impairments and these executive functions. And when I say executive functions, it's the set of skills that we use to direct and control our behavior to get things done.
mhm,
So if you are, if we think about a car, for example, and a car is, has a brand new engine and it's totally capable of getting you from here to the Publix down the street. But if on the inside of the car, you it's a stick shift and it's not labeled and you don't know where drive is, where the reverse is, if you can't find your glasses so you can't read the street signs, if you don't know where the key is so you can't start the ignition and everything is just all over the place, then even though the engine, which is your brain, is capable of getting you there, you are so disorganized, you don't have, these resources to get you there in an organized way. And so lots of things go uncomplete, they're not completed. And so that's just a analogy to sort of help you understand this sort of like complex idea of executive functions. But it is the thing that impairs the ability to show up to work on time
mm,
because you're getting up too late and getting out of the house too late, um, or not doing homework or taking 3 hours to do homework that should only take an hour. So one of the things that we do with teens and kids who have this issue is to have them, write down the homework assignments on a whiteboard and the time, just to guesstimate the time. And this is a fun activity if you ever just want to do it. Like how long, if you have to do laundry, for example, fold this laundry, just guesstimate like how long you think that task would take.
mhm,
And if you say 30 minutes, and then actually time yourself and see how long it actually takes you. Most people are really off on
mm,
the time that they assign that they think it will take to do things.
mhm,
And kids are no different. And so assigning a time, it should take 10 minutes to do this. And I'm from 7 o'clock to 7:10. I'm going to work on this math study guide. And you do all of the assignments like that. And then you build in the breaks. And so they're not getting up. If you have the breaks already built into the study, then they will be more inclined to work through until they reach a natural break and then take a break. Otherwise, if there's no time, there's no schedule that's visible, then they're getting up to go to the bathroom and to go get a glass of water and then to go get a snack. And so something that should take, 10 minutes ends up taking, 45.
gotcha. Wow. So with the executive functioning piece, are evaluations done?
Yeah, so not all evaluations, our evaluations always include executive functioning. So we definitely look at executive function, weaknesses through
Mhm.
rating scales completed by the parent and teacher.
Okay.
And we look at executive function directly through tasks in the office. And so executive functioning is more predictive of future success than IQ.
Hmm.
That's just how impactful they are. Or like stroke victims, for example, oftentimes what happens with stroke victims is they lose their executive functions, and so they are forgetful of where they put things, and
Mhm.
it leads to like a lower quality of life.
Hmm.
Specifically, because even if you recover from a stroke, but those impairments in executive functions, which is why they, definitely recommend rehab. And this is someone in my family experienced this. It was the executive functions that led to most of the frustration, not the
Mhm.
symptoms of the stroke itself.
Wow, that again is interesting, and you or somebody from your team must come back to talk about, because that is a whole nother category of,
So interesting. It is.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's very fascinating. So as we are, getting ready to wind down, and y'all, please in the comments, if you have some questions, this is the very best time to ask them around psychological evaluations. And I did dabble a little bit into executive functioning, so while we have Dr. Rush on here. But I want to ask, as it relates to the psych evaluations, is there something that maybe you want to share with the viewers that maybe your clients miss as it relates to it, either some misconceptions or myths as it relates to coming in and getting a psych evaluation done?
I will say, and just speaking to parents,
Mhm.
and sometimes if your teacher is saying that a kid is, whatever, like not interacting with others socially, always meet with the teacher, seek feedback, get an idea for how your kid is, functioning, in comparison to others. Is there anything that's standing out? Maybe if you don't ask, they won't tell. Surprisingly, but I see that a lot, that a kid has a diagnosis from me, but the teacher never referred for it before, and it's fifth grade. Meanwhile, there's been this severe reading disability. So ask questions if the kid is not doing well, or, maybe there is something that needs, a more comprehensive evaluation, and early intervention is key. So if there's any breakdown in functioning whatsoever, more behavioral problems than is typical, first we want to try things at the school level, like an intervention or a reward plan or something. But if that's not working, to request an evaluation from the school. I mean, they can be very expensive privately, but insurance does pay for evaluations. There are some parents who can get a full comprehensive evaluation that's, generally between $3,000 and $3,300 with a copay. I mean, that's not everyone, but you can look into that and see if your insurance covers any part of an evaluation, or you can always get one from school, writing a letter requesting one and making sure to include in the letter the reason that you're requesting the evaluation, information from, any sort of challenges your kid is having, and any sort of teacher, parent teacher communications that indicate that the kid is struggling, um, to get to seek an evaluation from the school for free.
Okay. Interesting, interesting. So we got a few people commenting. Princess said everything discussed tonight I'm going through. And she said, and stay on top of it until your child gets what they need.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
There are places that will not lift a finger if you're not yelling about your kid. But if you make it clear that you are, demanding that they help your child,
Hmm.
because there are rules and regs that every, school system has to abide by.
Hmm.
But if no one is watching or requiring that they do so, then your kid sort of falls, through the cracks. And it's very, very hard to remediate after a certain age. I mean, when it gets, it's early intervention is key, is what I will say.
Okay.
The earlier, the better.
Is there any type of checklist that parents might be able to assess, or to, because maybe they don't even know what to ask or what they're missing or anything like that. So,
Hmm.
any thoughts around that,
Checklist.
or questions, a list of questions that they
Yeah,
need to.
I could definitely send you something with a list of questions,
Okay.
and if there's nothing that comes to mind that you can order, like,
Hmm.
there's a lot that I use, but you have to, have certain credentials to order them. But
Hmm.
yeah, there's something that I could possibly send you, and then maybe you can post it somewhere,
Okay.
that people can download. And if there's so many symptoms under a particular category, then maybe you should consider an evaluation.
Okay. Very good. So Janita said, I had an evaluation and discovered I am ADHD and attentive type. I wish I had known years ago.
And I'll tell you something about ADHD, in adults that are undiagnosed. So research shows that, adults that are undiagnosed ADHD have poorer outcomes. They have more, marriage and relationship failures. They've lost more jobs, and have more job changes. They, are more depressed and have more legal troubles. So undiagnosed ADHD can be extremely damaging. And so it is, and it's also demoralizing. So you've been struggling all this time, and you've always thought it's just you're stupid, you can't do anything right, when all along you've had this, ADHD, which is extremely impairing. I mean, it is, that's why when parents come to my office and they're reluctant, to start medication, I get it, I sympathize. But would you hesitate if your kid had diabetes, or a cancer? And this is just that serious. The outcomes are dismal, without treatment, and you're struggling, to make it, and you don't have to. And so anyone in your household, even if it's a husband or a spouse, they're struggling to keep it together, to get things done on time, to really show up fully in their life, even though they're smart and capable. Consider that. Consider if it's, an attention deficit disorder, or something you need to look further into.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I've heard of adult ADHD, but really, again, not all that familiar with it. So, yeah, I think it's great that you're mentioning that. Now, this next question really goes to, the licensure or certification around this work that you do in terms of doing these psych evaluations. So, is there a specific certification or a licensure that goes along with this, and continuing education that accompanies this, or not so much?
Yeah, so psychological evaluations can be completed by school psychologists if they're working in a school. And they, in that case, would not have to have a doctorate or a doctoral degree. They can have like a master's degree or specialist degree, as long as they're a school psychologist working in a school. If you're getting a private evaluation, the person must have a doctorate degree, like a PhD or PsyD, and be a psychologist. And so those are or neuropsychologist. So neuropsychologist, psychologist in the private setting, unless you're getting an evaluation from a school psychologist in a school, they're also qualified to provide the evaluation.
Okay. And do the evaluations change at all in terms of the questions that are asked, or what have you? Have you seen any changes in that, or has it been pretty much been consistent?
I think the battery itself changes based on the question that you want to answer. So if I'm trying to diagnose dyslexia, there may be a ton of tests that I give that I don't give if I'm looking for a bipolar disorder. So the type of test what the entire test battery will look like is different based on the question to be answered. Okay. And then over the years, I think we've gotten more tests. So that's changed. That's been kind of nice. And so there are now more specific tests to look at writing, more specific tests to look at reading and math problem solving. There's even more specific tests to look at a problem solving ability and autism. So tests have gotten, a bit more comprehensive just based on what we know, that allows us to better assess some of these conditions.
Okay. Very good. Princess said, it's worth it. It helps the child throughout life. This is a process and it has its ups and downs, but I'm going to say I'm thankful that I can advocate for my children. Very good. Thank you, Princess. And we're glad that you are able to advocate for them too.
Absolutely.
Of course, our little people oftentimes cannot, speak up for themselves. So, wow. Well, this has been very interesting and insightful and enlightening. So I've learned quite a bit tonight. I hope you all have too, although many of you seems like you have had some engagement or involvement with psych eval. So, but for folks that that maybe have not, this broadcast can help maybe give them a bit of insight. Any suggestions, in terms of folks wanting to get a psych evaluation, and not only, children, I know you can get those done at the school or whatnot, but specifically adults, any tips or suggestions that you have related to, how to go about that process and identify somebody to do the psych evaluation for adults?
You can start with, and there's just in general, like a search, like symptom checker. If you are having some specific symptom. There are, I don't know the websites right now, but there definitely are like symptom checker websites, and you can just enter some of your symptoms there if you're completely unfamiliar. But most people say, I think I have autism, or I think I have ADHD. You could start with Psychology Today. So it's www.psychologytoday.com. Since people are probably from all over, and that's just a site that allows you to search for a provider by the insurance you have, by the service you need, and by your geographic location. So you could start there and look for a psychologist or someone that does psychological evaluations, or psychological assessment, it's also called sometimes. And you can type in your zip code and it will sort of bring up a list of providers. And you can also, again, filter by your insurance if you want to use your insurance as well.
Good deal. Now, you are in Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
which means you can see people that are residents of Georgia. And are you taking new clients?
Yeah, we have 4 psychologists. I'm about to hire 2 more.
Okay.
So I probably have a bit of a wait, but we can definitely get someone in. We can work them in.
All right. And how can folks connect with you and your practice?
You can visit with us at www.hmpsychology.com, or our number is 770-375-8124. You could give us a call and make an appointment. You can also go to our website, again, www.hmpsychology.com, and there is a form that you can submit to sort of request a call back, and we can reach you that way also.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Well, I definitely want to thank you for your time tonight.
Absolutely. This is fun.
Good. All right, Dr. Paula is on. She said Dr. Rush is an amazing psychologist. I enjoyed this session. Nicole, thanks so much for having her on your show. Thank you, Dr. Lewis.
Paula, Dr. Lewis.
Us. Yes, I appreciate it. This is what it's all about. So this was really, really good. And y'all, let's keep the conversation going. So tag someone, share this post. It's going to live on Facebook and on YouTube, so you can, check it out there, like, comment, share, and also on the Greater Works Network on Roku TV. It'll live there as well. So again, thank you, Dr. Rush. And for those of you who may be new to Conversations with Nicole, I invite you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we get involved. I will say that on Monday we have Dr. Rita Walker, who is the author of The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health. That'll be joining us on Monday. So should be an interesting discussion. She also has a FSU Connect. I believe she did her PhD at FSU. So, there's a Tallahassee connection there, which I love.
Yeah.
Yes. So again, thank you, Dr. Rush. We got a number of folks chiming in saying thank you. Great conversation. So very good. All right. You all have a safe rest of the evening, a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.